Welcome to Stories from the Center of the Universe, the podcast about the human experience.
Edouard, Asmar, welcome to the Center of the Universe.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
All right. I guess we should mention that you and I know each other from work.
Yep.
And I'm an employee. What do you consider yourself?
Sponsored by / pseudo employee. So I think the official title is entrepreneur in residence right now.
Really? Is that your official title?
I think so. I haven't seen an org chart with that written on it, so I don't know how official it is, but that is what the competition / the position program was called, on the entrepreneur in residence program.
Got it. Very cool. We'll come back to the entrepreneur part of that.
Great.
Title. Very cool. All right. So I have to say, you and I were recording for 10, 12 minutes yesterday, and a pretty bad storm came through and knocked out my internet. And it came back on for like 5 minutes. We tried again, and then it went out again. And so we've punted to the next day. So I appreciate your willingness to punt to the next day, and thanks for being available two nights in a row.
Of course. Yeah, it was pretty apocalyptic yesterday here as well. I live on the first floor where I am, so it can get pretty scary when it rains.
Scary from a thunder and lightning perspective, or from a flood perspective, or both?
Neither, I guess. I guess I exaggerated a little bit. Just you can hear the water outside, and you can see it. And if you step outside, there's lots of puddles. So scary is the wrong word. Just inconvenient. Yeah.
Inconvenient, and sounds like drainage isn't perfect where you live.
Yeah, the drainage is quite an issue.
All right, so I know the answer to this question, but since we're recording anew, where were you born?
I was born in DC.
And do you consider yourself a DC guy?
I am a DC guy through and through. I will advocate for DC to anyone who listens. I'm a big fan. And I moved back here. I voted with my feet, my dollars, my life. So yeah, I love it here. Yeah,
so besides DC, where else have you lived?
So when I was a kid, we lived in Ecuador for between 3 and 4 years. I never actually know because I was so young. We moved when I was like 8 months old. And all I really remember is I started pre-K 3 or pre-K 4 when we came back here, which, 3 or 4 years. And then other than that, I was based here throughout. Went to college in California. But it was cool with my mom's job. So she worked for the World Bank. She would often have to travel a lot. So I got to travel with her a bunch on her business trips. And there were times when she would be like stationed in other countries long term. So for example, she was in Ethiopia once for some period of months. And I went for a summer for like a month. And that was like a pretty common type of thing that would happen, which was very cool. So kind of like based in DC, but got to go a bunch of different places and explore. And yeah.
So fairly worldly for such a young guy, because how old are you, Eddie?
I am 25 now.
So 25, and you've probably been to how many countries, you think?
I think my resume, because it's always like a fun little item to get people to talk, says like 50, I want to say, is when I had last counted. That could be wrong. I have my resume on my computer so I can look, and I know that one's accurate just in case, but I think it's in that.
Nobody's going to fact check you on that one.
Yeah, exactly.
But I mean, if my math's right, you're doing about 2 countries a year of life.
That would make a lot of sense, because usually when I would go places with my mom, like she just like really wanted to take full advantage of it. So she would just go crazy. Like if we were so for example, she lived in Lesotho for a while, which is the tiny country in the middle of South Africa. And we went to every country in the neighborhood, just because she wanted to take advantage of it, which I mean was amazing. But yeah, 2 a year honestly even sounds conservative with the way my mom did things.
Yeah, that's I mean, most of humanity doesn't get those opportunities. So in a lot of ways, you were very fortunate, and you're probably a lot better off for having experienced so many different cultures.
100%. I mean, that's definitely the thing I am most thankful for in my childhood and growing up. It was awesome and really cool to see places all over. Yeah, and very thankful to my mom, obviously, for making that possible. It was often the sort of thing where she, like, I think like I mentioned, she'd have a business trip, and I'd just tag along and stay in the hotel room. So a lot of them weren't, official like tourism visits. I was just along for the ride.
Not the worldly experience, maybe when you're just hanging out in the hotel.
Well, what she would do, and what she did in Ethiopia this time, in other places, sometimes she had friends who would take me around, but like in Ethiopia, she just hired a guy to hang out with me. It was like a 22-year-old guy or something who I guess, she found, who I was there, I think 2 weeks, and we just hung out. He just took me places. He's a great guy.
Yeah. It sounds like you got along with him.
Yeah. It was a really fun experience.
That's really cool. What for the core of your mom's job? What did she do?
Yeah, so she's like bounced around a bit. She was at the World Bank. I think she was actually, I don't know the number exactly. But before she retired last year, I think she was up there in like top 20 longest tenured World Bank employees, like consecutively. She'd been there for more than 30 years, I think. So she was there a long time. But the role she kept returning to and that she did the most was resident representative, which is basically like the private banker / like diplomat for the World Bank to a given country. So that's why we lived in Ecuador. She was the resident representative there. And then when she was in Lesotho, that she was the resident representative there as well.
That's really cool. I'm a big fan of going places, but some are better than others. What's your favorite place you've ever been?
That's always a really hard question to answer. And I think it comes down to, frankly, to expectations. Because I think for some places you really have really high expectations and you get there and it's like, all right. And then there are some you just know nothing about and you show up and it blows you away. And for me, that was honestly Montenegro, sort of a random place. But we only stopped there, I think for 2 days because we were like driving through that part of Europe and it was amazing. I always look back at those 2 days like one of the coolest places I've ever been. And so just different from like the vast majority of tourists there are Russian. At least that's in the places where I was. And I think so many places you visit today, everything is English and things are like catered to the American audience. And it was really interesting there because it was the total opposite. Like there were like signs in Russian, the hotels had stuff in Russian. It was just kind of funny and cool. And you felt like you were actually one of the few tourists there who wasn't like Russian.
I'm a bit of and I proved last night that I don't know geography perfectly, but I've done this sort of nerdy thing with friends where I'm like, let's just name all the countries and pick a continent. Montenegro is usually the last sovereignty mentioned in Europe.
Yeah, it's a pretty random place. That's why I had no expectations whatsoever, but I was blown away.
Blown away just because it did not fit any expectations you had or didn't fit many, it sounds like.
I think it also has all the things I like. Like I really like dramatic coastlines. I love castles, like as a kid. So like my mom is British and we used to go to the UK like once every 2 years, I want to say. And like every time we would see like on average a castle a day because I just loved castles. So that was like a huge thing I was into. And Montenegro just had some really cool castles, which I continue to love, but at a more sustainable pace. But the castles there and the fortresses there were just incredible and in really just amazing backdrops.
Yeah, and people that have lived mostly in North America can't fathom how old some of those structures are.
Yeah. That's something that's really funny to me, having gone to sort of an international school and not really having done American history, is like Americans will sort of be like, oh, this is 100 years old. And it's like, treat it with like a huge amount of reverence. And I always find that really funny.
Well, and you are American. So let's talk about the school you went to. You K through 12, you went to, what's the name of your school?
It was Washington International School.
And it's a private school, but the students are not typically from DC.
Typically, yeah, especially when I was there. So there used to be this deal for embassies, the World Bank, IMF, whatever, where the employers would pay for private school tuition. And what that meant is all those kids went to private school. Which private school did they go to? Mine, because it was the international school where they could learn in their native language. They would be surrounded by other sort of like diplomats' kids, whatever. And that worked super well then. I think benefits have gotten a lot worse over time. And I think the school also realized that it's not in the cultural DNA of foreign people to donate money to schools. And so it's become a lot more American. But when I was there, it was still much less American in terms of just American people going there because they liked it.
Yeah, that's an interesting notion. I didn't. Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, most schools are interested in money, right?
Yeah, it's very apparent.
Well, it sounds like you feel bad about that. You wish that your school had maintained its international feel.
I do. Yeah, I think it's a bit of a shame because it was a very unique culture that I really appreciated, and they had sort of this mantra of like making you a global citizen, which I always laughed at when I was there because it sounds so silly. But I think they actually succeeded to an extent with most of the kids. And I think a big part of the success there was the diversity of people that were there. That is definitely not as true today. I think diversity of nationality, to be clear.
Yeah. I mean, the diversity of nationality was pretty obvious when you went there, based on the way you've described it. Maybe not so socioeconomically, though. Maybe socio may not.
No, exactly, and that's why I clarified that. I think they did not, in fact, do a very good job of being socioeconomically diverse at all, because it was very, it was that slice, right? It's people who rose to be ambassadors or work at the IMF or work at the World Bank, which is a certain socioeconomic slice, which is very homogenous.
You had mentioned,
and I think they have done better there. So to be fair, they have done a lot better there.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, look, organizations change over time, and some of those changes are good and some are not so good. It sounds like they've experienced a bit of both over the last few years.
No, I think it's a really good thing that they've improved the sort of socioeconomic split. I think what's a less good thing is not keeping the nationality split. I think that we definitely needed more people from DC at the school. And I think they've done a good job of that, which is really, really good. I think what we didn't necessarily need is a lot of American people who just wanted their kids to have an international education and could pay full price. I think at that, Sidwell is probably a better place for that, I think that kind of hurt the international mission of the school a little bit.
Yeah, it's a bit unusual to spend most of your life in the U.S., but I'm guessing you know more about cultures from other countries better than, at least when you were in school, better than you knew American culture and history.
Yeah, 100%. We didn't do American anything in school. I think one of the funniest moments when I went to when I first started school, so I went to college at Stanford, which was in many respects super American. I think something astounding, 50% of the students are actually from California. It's way more Californian than you'd think. But I took my first econ class there, and everything was in dollars. It was about the Fed. It was just totally US centric in a way that shocked me. Whereas my economics classes in high school had all been more international, and we might do problems in different currencies. It sounds really dumb, but it was kind of a culture shock going to Stanford and everything being so America centric. Same with history, for example. We did world history and we did history of every place. It was very geographically diverse. So we did Chinese history or history of the Middle East or different bits of we did African history, we did South American history, we did all of that. And American people were always confused when I knew about history in those places. And I always thought that was sort of a given, that was like what you learned in school. And so it was kind of shocking when people just like all they knew history wise or like what they had learned was just American. I was like, how did you spend years on like 200 years? Like what was the curriculum?
It's all about depth, I guess.
Yeah, it's all about depth, I guess. And to be clear, I don't have that depth. Like I don't know a whole lot about the U.S.
Yeah, when I was in school, I went to K through 12 in Central Virginia. It was a lot of American history and some European history, but that was about it.
Yeah, which is pretty limited, all things considered.
Super limited, and
a lot happened elsewhere.
Most. Yeah. Well, I mean, we don't even draw maps accurately in the U.S.
Yeah.
I mean, there's certain countries in other continents that are a lot bigger than we portray them on our maps.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's weird. And by the way, I was in my 50s when I learned that. A little sad. You mentioned languages, learning via different languages. So English was part of the core experience for everybody that went there, or is that not true?
Yeah. So everyone did English to some extent. It depended on grade level. So, for example, in primary school, all classes, or you did half your day in English, half your day in Spanish. Or whatever language it was you chose. I happened to do Spanish. Whereas in middle school, it was by class. So like science and math would be in English, and then history and geography, for example, in my case, were in Spanish. And so it sort of depended on grade level, but you basically did your whole education bilingually. So in a blend of whatever two languages you were focused on, whereas where one was always English.
Why Spanish?
So like I mentioned earlier, I had lived in Ecuador as a kid. And when we moved back to the US, my mom wanted me to continue with Spanish, and I was already fluent, so it made sense. My dad actually at the time wanted me to do French. But
wait. Before we go to your dad in French, you were already fluent in Spanish after being basically a toddler?
Yeah. I mean, I learned Spanish and English at the same time level. Like when we moved back from Ecuador, I was speaking both Spanish and English like interchangeably.
Is that something that is common for kids that age? Because I know small children are sponges in that way, but it doesn't seem like that's typical.
I think my parents talk about it like it's impressive, but I also think that those are the same parents that put up my like 4th grade art. So I think it's my take is it's pretty like, I think if you grow up in where people are speaking different languages, I think it happens naturally. I mean, like my dad, he's Lebanese, and so many Lebanese people grow up bilingual in French and Arabic. And that seems to work out. So I think it just comes, or my girlfriend, for example, so she was born in China, and she speaks both Chinese and English fine.
You were telling me yesterday that it's not really classic or formal French, same for Arabic, that you learned from your dad.
Yeah, that's true. So in Lebanon, they don't really speak those languages purely. So maybe it is a little harder than it appears. They kind of mix and match. And in Arabic, especially, they just have their own version that is quite different from the written or formal Arabic. Yeah.
And I think you called the combination of the two Frenchic.
Yeah, I made that up though. But yeah.
Arabic.
Yeah, it could be that too, but maybe less.
I think I like Frenchic better. I think I like your made up term better than mine. So you consider yourself somebody who speaks French and Arabic as well, but it doesn't translate to all parts of the Middle East or all parts of French.
Yeah, and I would never say that I'm like fluent in those. I'm varying degrees of conversational in them.
You practice your Spanish these days?
Yes, actually. So I guess we can talk about the entrepreneurship stuff. Well, I had always been told as I was growing up, it's really good that like you speak languages and you're interested in language. It's going to like help in your career later. And that was never true up until now. There's not a lot of jobs coming out of college that say like, bilingual required. But when I started Hansa, which is the company that I'm working on now, where just as a brief overview, we're looking to empower small businesses. So just like think the tire shop in your neighborhood or a restaurant or whatever, just like mom and pop style businesses, to basically have greater access to trust products. So like financing, credit cards, loans, insurance, whatever. But anyway, one thing I noticed when I was doing research on this space is a huge number of successful or just small business owners in general in the United States today are Spanish speaking, and Spanish speaking first. Like they prefer to speak Spanish. They prefer to like consume media in Spanish. And so one thing that we've started doing with Hansa is just because it seemed easy enough, like I speak Spanish, why not do it? Is we published our site bilingually. We are just trying to offer everything in Spanish. So I've gotten to practice quite a lot there, and have also talked to or interviewed some business owners who spoke Spanish. Or prefer to speak Spanish. Obviously, for the most part, they speak English as well. They just prefer to speak Spanish.
Yeah, and there's something lost in translation when one of the parties or both parties aren't fluent in the language. So if you can meet them in the place where they feel most comfortable, you probably learn more and form a deeper bond, I imagine.
I think it also just creates some trust. So
yeah. I think it's brilliant. I think you starting with bilingual from the beginning is the way to go, especially Spanish. I think Spanish, at least in North America and clearly in South America, are the languages to go with. And I wish I had taken Spanish when I was younger.
Yeah, and the thing is, you see so many companies, not just in this small business space, but just in general, just don't do it. And I think at a certain level, it's because they're too far along, right? They've done so much work and it's so hard now to go back and translate everything, and they have to like build everything from scratch. And I kind of thought, hey, I've got this golden opportunity. I'm starting totally from scratch anyway. If I just force myself to make everything bilingual to start, then I won't have this issue in 2 years when all of a sudden I need to like translate everything or overhaul everything. And that'll be like a nice competitive advantage that I have.
Definitely a competitive advantage. I think you're also being sensitive to your marketplace or your business consumers, what they need. Small business in America today seems to be at least in my lifetime, the toughest spot it's ever been. It seems like everybody, by everybody, I mean governments, I mean other businesses that are their business model is more of a support other businesses sort of thing. They tend to gravitate to the full scale giant corporations and maybe leave the small business person behind. Can you share your thoughts on small business in America these days?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. I think, unfortunately, I think there's so much innovation happening today and over the past few years. But whenever you look at that innovation, it's either, startups for startups. So people who are trying to help out other people like them. Innovation for enterprise, like you mentioned, for really big companies, and I think the incentives there make sense. You sign up one giant company as your customer or as the person you're helping or working with, and you're set, right? They're huge partners. They have deep pockets, and you can really prove yourself out without doing a whole lot of sales work. You can also innovate for consumers, right? For just normal people. And there's just such a volume of people who could be interested that you're almost guaranteed to hit somebody. And also there's just this like huge amount of tooling that lets you reach normal people easily and cheaply. Like you can advertise on Facebook, you can advertise on Instagram, on TikTok now. You can get data from all sorts of firms like the credit bureaus, and you can figure out like, hey, I've built the best product for people like Bob. Bob has a dog, a car, a house, and he's 33. And I can find Bob and like get my thing in front of him really easily today. And unfortunately, none of these things are true if you run a small business. You're not big enough that it's worth building just for you. So people aren't looking at you the way they look at enterprises. And then like there's not this tooling or this understanding about who you are and what you do in the same way as for you in your personal life. And so even if I build like the very best, most innovative product for tire shops with 2 to 3 employees who work on Fords, I don't know, I'm just making something up, like it's really hard for me to find that group, which makes it prohibitive for me to build for them and innovate for them, which I think really sucks.
Yeah, so there's this weird chasm between the individual consumer and enterprise.
Right. And I've seen that so I've gone on a bit of a kick of just going and walking into small businesses or having friends refer me to business owners that they know and talking to them. And I see this all the time where I'll talk to an owner and they'll say, yeah, in my personal life, I bank with a neobank. I save using a fintech. I started investing successfully. I did all this and that, and it's really encouraging and it's great. And then we talk about their business and they're like, yeah, I still use paper checks and I bank with like Cross River Bank. I'm making that up, but like, their local bank, which is not very good. And they're just not really like it doesn't line up, right? They're so tech forward and so like able to access innovation in their personal lives, but in their business lives they just don't.
And it's because nobody's really built the services with the small business person in mind.
A lot of the times it's because it doesn't exist. A lot of the times too, it's just education. Like they don't know what's out there. And then it's also an element of trust, which I find interesting, that people seem to be more willing to take risks in their personal life than in their business life, which is interesting, but true. So they might be more willing to take a gamble on like a brand new player when it's their personal bank account than when it's the business bank account.
That's interesting. Why do you think that is?
I think often there's maybe a fear around like regulation in the business space, of like, hey, is this legit? Is it okay? People seem to be very scared in general of running afoul of regulations for their business. I think that's one piece. I think another piece is just stability. I think people are okay to some degree with things breaking in their personal lives or having to find an alternative. But I think especially if you're a customer facing business or you have a reputation that you need to uphold. And in many cases for small businesses, their reputation is everything. And I think if you choose to work with a partner who breaks down or stops working or is not great for whatever reason, and that could have an impact on your reputation, that's pretty bad for you as a business.
Yeah, I guess a mistake in the business world can feel earth-shattering, where a mistake in your personal life is easier to overcome.
I think that's true. I mean, I still have a lot to learn, but that's sort of what I hypothesize.
Yeah, I could make up some theories, but I don't. None of them are grounded at all, so I won't do that.
Yeah.
So let's go back to school. Were you super academic, like it was all about school? You love attending class, you love doing homework, or did you combine that with interest outside of the academic experience?
Yeah, I was not. It's a hard question to answer. I would say I was very academic personally, but not very academic like in school. Like I never liked going to class. I did homework very quickly. I once got on a report card, someone wrote perfunctory, and that stuck with me. And I was never a huge fan really of like the formal education or formal education experience. That being said, like in my free time, all I did was read. Like I was constantly reading, like I would read history books, I would read science books. I was a very self-guided academic is the way that I would put it.
No, I love that answer, because I was thinking school structure and the academics associated with that environment. But you're right, self-study is huge. And the fact that you were a teenager or preteen and you were doing that on your own is awesome and unusual.
Yeah, it was great. And it was actually really cool by junior year, as I think when teachers really started to notice that I was doing that. And they kind of encouraged it, which was great. I had a history teacher and a math teacher and an economics teacher, actually, who started just like assigning me books outside of the classroom, which I would just read in my own time. And we would meet, I think it was like once a month to like talk about what I'd read, which was pretty cool. And I just really enjoyed that they were encouraging of what I was doing and helpful, which is great.
So you were adulting as a 17-year-old. I didn't really adult until I was well into my 20s.
That's one way to put it. I think I just have never done so well. Like in college, for example, I think I went to very few lectures. I never learned very well when it's just like someone talking. I always have learned a lot better from reading. And so I always just preferred that.
Yeah, there have been lots of studies done that say that the typical learner with an average intellect will retain 20% of what they hear someone else describe. If you give them a visual, the retention's better. If you have the student do the actual thing, they actually practice whatever the concept is, there's even better retention. There's some fields of study where you can't actually practice. It is purely intellectual, but it's funny. And the most of the developed world in a lot of ways still tries to teach via lecture.
Yeah, I'm a big lecture detractor. I never enjoyed lectures. That was actually a big reason. So I did my undergrad, I did computer science. And then I decided to go back to Stanford to do a master's in history. And a big part of that is because I felt like I'd missed out a little bit on the academic experience doing computer science, because the vast majority of those classes were just like giant lectures. The assignments were just practices, right? Implement this, answer this math problem. And I didn't feel like I was really getting sort of like the liberal arts experience. And then so I went back to do history, which was the complete opposite. Like every class was a small, like 10-person seminar where we would just talk about ideas, and the assignments were just like, write what you think, big essays. And I enjoyed that a lot more as an academic experience.
So you got your undergrad in computer science and a master's in
history.
A master's in history.
Yeah.
Eddie, I got to tell you two things real quickly based on you getting a master's in history. One, Rob has just joined us. His nickname is Silent Rob. He's actually not going to say a thing. He loves listening to these conversations, and he does the write-ups that accompany the recording. So welcome, Silent Rob, but you won't hear him say anything. And Rob's a history major, which ties to history. Nice. I'm also a history major, Eddie, and when I had to declare my major, and I waited well into my junior year of college to declare, because I was all over the place. I really didn't know what I wanted to do, or certainly not even, I didn't know what I wanted to study. My dad somehow got me on the phone, and he knew I was waffling amongst majors, and he said, "Hey, I want you to know any major's fine except history." And I just declared it literally like an hour before this conversation. And he went into some detail about why a history major was really a bad idea. For me personally,
because I got a lot of talks about why it was a bad idea. So I'm just curious what the reasoning you heard was.
So he said, well, he basically said to me, "Do you want to be a lawyer?" And I said, "No, I do not." He said, do you want to teach history? I said, "Maybe." And he said, "Do you want to do a lot of research?" And I said, "No, doesn't sound fun to me." And he goes, "Yeah, so why are you majoring in history?" Because it was very much I was going to college. Whatever you majored in was kind of what you were going to do the rest of your life, was the mindset. Yeah. And I'm glad culturally that we've kind of broken out of that, and you can go do anything at any time if you want.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I was lucky because I felt like I had this cushion of the computer science degree, which is obviously, I guess, what I fell back on after college. I'm not a working historian today, obviously. So I've done absolutely nothing with it. But I was lucky enough to know that I could fall back on that like very practical computer science degree.
This episode is brought to you by Foodio. Foodio is a cafe serving coffee, tea, and smoothies with breakfast, lunch, and pastries. Plus, you'll find products from local farms and makers for sale on site. Find more info at ashlandvirginia.com.
All right, so you went to Stanford. How did you choose Stanford as a guy who grew up in an international school on the East Coast?
The true story is pretty dumb, but I really wanted to go far from home, from DC. So that was like criteria one. So the only two places I really seriously applied were Stanford and Cambridge, like in the UK. I got into both. I actually couldn't decide between them, so I committed to both. Basically, at the last minute, chose Stanford because I didn't want to do economics. The way it works in the UK is you apply for a specific major, and that's what you have to do. And I realized that I wasn't sure that all I wanted to do was economics for the next 3 years. And I was right, obviously. So I made the right decision, but that's basically it. I just decided I don't want to do economics. I guess why Stanford was one of those two, I didn't really answer, but I was really enamored with California. I just thought it was
a beautiful state.
I'd never really been. I went once in 10th grade for a road trip, and it was cool. I guess I did a summer program as well. But in general, I just had like this really romanticized idea of California, and I thought it was going to be like the greatest place, just the greatest thing ever. So yeah, I picked Stanford mainly because it was in California.
The weather's better than Cambridge, certainly.
Yeah. Well, I guess, I picked Stanford in the US. I was always going to apply to Cambridge because I was very enamored with Cambridge for other reasons. But
so for the typical student, they don't even consider places like Cambridge or Stanford. You obviously had to be very academically oriented and achieved quite a bit before you graduated high school. Were you naturally are you naturally a bright person? Or and think back to when you were a teenager, like there's some maturity things going on. You're going through puberty. It's not quite what it's like as a 25-year-old. But was it just natural, God-given intellect, or were you super scrappy? Or was it a combination?
I would say it's more the way that things are measured. I think I've always I think I'm a very good test taker. Let me put it that way. And I have a very good memory, especially for things I read. And I think so much of academic sort of achievement and rigor and what gets you over the next hoop in today, and especially when I graduated, I think they actually got rid of the SAT for a lot of schools, which I actually think is a great thing because I think it's so gamey. But basically, I was just really good at those things. So, for example, my mom had me take the ACT, I think it was when I was in like 8th grade. And so I knew from a young age I was just good at tests. So I was the kid everyone hated. Like I never really studied for them. I just showed up and I would do really well because it was just a skill. Like I was good at tests. I don't think that makes me smart necessarily. It just meant I was really good at taking tests.
And like being really good at taking tests, I guess, has its applications in the real world, but they don't seem to be broad or deep.
Yeah, and that's what I always tell people. I think it's a bit of a misnomer, academic achievement. I think there are things that I'm really proud of and things that I was really good at. But I think a whole lot of what opens up elite colleges or lets you go to these really selective institutions is almost purely test taking in this stage.
Yeah, if you have a really strong GPA and you ace or nearly ace an aptitude test, you can go anywhere you want.
Exactly, and that's basically what I had. Obviously, you have to have some sort of. So for Cambridge, that's actually basically all it is. So in the UK, they're very, very number oriented, or at least they were when I was applying. I don't know if it's changed. The only additional hoop they have you jump through is you have to do a series of interviews there, which are notoriously weird. And mine were in fact very weird, but that's about it. It's mainly numbers based. With Stanford, obviously they like to talk about their holistic process. So there had to be a little bit more than grades. And it's fun. They write you a letter after you get in around why you got in. And I think to send it back to what we were talking about earlier, allegedly it was my letters of recommendation from my teachers that said I was I think they said a voracious reader. And that's why they said I got into Stanford.
Let's go back to the notoriously weird interviews. So you interviewed, it sounds like.
Yeah, I did the interviews.
What was, so you said notorious, meaning like you may or may not have found them weird. Did you find them weird?
Oh, I certainly found them weird. They were very strange. But I had like been warned that they were weird, and they have a reputation. So the reputation of them is the way they work is like you sit down with an Oxford Don, which is like they're sort of the professors in the colleges, and they grill you for half an hour to an hour, and you often hear stories of people who walk out crying. I actually saw someone walk out crying. They tend to not be so much like factual interviews rather than they're trying to trip you up or make you feel uncomfortable. So for example, I don't know if this is true, but my cousin had claimed that at her interview, someone had like either worn a bathrobe or was like drinking tea. Like just, there's all these notorious stories of people of the Dons doing weird things in the interviews and causing people to be uncomfortable. And mine was nothing like that, but they were certainly really weird. Like one interviewer I sat down, he was like, "You're coming from the US. Why does healthcare work the way it does?" And like, as if it was like my fault.
Have you defend something you didn't institute? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. He was like, "Tell me why you like do it this way." I was like, I don't know. Sorry. And he was like Australian. So it was pretty weird. And then there was another guy so I had, I think 2 interviews if I remember correctly. And the second one, it was like, because it was for economics, it was a game theory interview. And he sets up this game on the board and he tells me the rules and he's like, "Let's play. We play, I lose. Like, let's play again. I play, I lose. Let's play again. I play, I lose," you know? And I'm kind of just sitting there like, what are we doing? It's been like 10 minutes of us playing this stupid game on a whiteboard. And then finally he asked this question. He's like, "You keep losing. Why?" And it turned out to be like this game theory thing of like why the game was set up such that I could never win by following the strategy he had told me to follow. But it's just like stuff like that where it really throws you off and it's just very odd. And he was also just an odd guy as well. And he had been the one who, right before my interview, I'd seen someone run out crying. So I was pretty intimidated.
Yeah. So I will share a couple of theories I have for that. One is they had maybe a reputation that they kind of stumbled into back in the day, and they thought it made them unique, and they wanted to maintain that reputation. I don't know how much I believe that theory. The other thing is to be off-putting and to see how people react to someone behaving in odd ways or asking odd questions, I guess can be telling, but I'm not sure how important it is for a kid trying to get a bachelor's degree in something.
I think a big part of it is just trying to be off-putting to see how you react. That's the most common theory. And I mean, it works. People reacted in weird ways.
Yeah, I don't know that you have to be, well, if you're preparing folks sincerely for post-college life, then I guess maybe that makes some sense. But if it made a ton of sense, a lot of schools would be doing it, right?
Well, I think a whole lot of Cambridge and Oxford in general. I actually ended up studying abroad at Oxford while I was at Stanford, so I saw this firsthand. But a lot of it is just really antiquated, right? Like they've been doing this for hundreds of years. And hundreds of years ago, when they started doing this, so much of your education, and I mean, it continues to be true. Like they still have the tutorial system where the vast majority of your classes are just one-on-one with a tutor. Like they just want to see, can you deal with the pressure and can you get along with these generally pretty like eccentric professors? So it is actually a good preparation for the very specific education that you get at Oxford and Cambridge. But like, would you need that to sit in a lecture hall? No. But to get ready for a tutorial with that person, maybe. Like I think if I had actually gone to Cambridge, my second interviewer would have been my like primary tutor. Which means I would have worked with him directly. So I think he was kind of sussing out as well, like, do I want to work with this kid for the next 3 years? Yeah.
So it kind of feels like a job interview a bit too.
Yeah, a little bit. Because it's very personal. The colleges, well, some of the colleges are very big, but some of the colleges are very small. So you never know.
Eddie, I don't know you really well, but I know you well enough to know that you put off a humble vibe.
Thank you.
Can I, and I'm asking, you're not offering, what did you get on the ACT in 8th grade? Do you remember?
I do not. I think it was in the 30s, but I do not know the exact.
Did you take it again after 8th grade?
Yeah, I took it for college on that one. I know.
What did you get on that one?
35.
I'm asking, you're not 35. So you missed it by 1. Do you remember what you missed?
I do not. No.
Okay.
Probably it was always the math one, I think, because I've always been very sloppy with math in the sense of like checking mistakes. Like I was always the guy, like I said, people kind of hated me in school for my test taking habits, but like I would finish the test, like an hour early generally. If like depending on how long the test was, I would often finish much earlier than you were supposed to finish. For lots of subjects that worked out great. For math, it often did not work out great. And so I would often make a lot of dumb mistakes. So math is always the one where I don't do as well.
So because of that, you got 35 out of 36 instead of 36 out of 36.
Yeah.
Yeah, I sat next to a guy in one of my calculus classes in high school. And to solve a calculus problem, I would typically need a page and a half or 2 pages of 8.5 by 11. We did everything manually with a pen or a pencil. And he would get it done in like a third of a page. And I'm like, how did you do that? I don't understand what you just did. But I'm guessing your brain and his brain are fairly similar.
Maybe.
And
that looks great when you get it right, but it's pretty funny when you get it wrong, which I did. Sometimes.
Can I ask your SAT scores? And by the way, when you took it, was it all 3? Was it 3 sections?
Yeah, it was all 3. It was all 3. That one, what was it? I want to say 2290, but I could be wrong. I don't know. I think
was
2290 sounds right.
That took the 110 away from you?
Yes, I believe that I got. Did I get an 800? I think I might have gotten an 800 in one of the English sections.
I love the fact that you're 25, not that far removed from taking SATs, and you don't remember your score.
I was never that. So that was also a thing about me that I think I was never really focused on my grades or test scores. Like I would just show up to these things. Like I wasn't obsessed with them. I always sort of felt, and I mean, I think this is a sign of privilege and being super lucky that these things always worked out. But I always felt like I get what I get. It'll be fine. Don't worry about it. just take the thing, see what the score is, submit it. It'll be fine.
That requires, I think I'll use the term bravery. Most people aren't that brave.
Yeah, maybe. I think I've never felt the need to, I guess, be something I'm not, or to have to, or I just never respected the process that much, I think, as well. Like I've never felt that those tests really accurately reflected much. And I always felt like, all right, I'm good at it. I'm going to give it the attention and respect it deserves. And
it becomes a ticket to another stage in your life, right?
Right. Yeah. Would I have a very different opinion if I were bad at them? Probably. I would probably still not respect them as much, but I probably would have, done a whole lot more to prep or something. But yeah, I was lucky enough that they were never very difficult, so I didn't pay too much attention to them.
Was Stanford easy for you?
It depends. I think Stanford is where I learned my biggest strength isn't depth. So I think what was interesting was every intro class I took at Stanford was really, or not intro class, but like there was a wall I hit in almost every subject where someone was better than me. And not just someone, but lots of someones. But I was one of the few people who could take up to that level in every subject and do well, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so I think I learned at Stanford that my strength is breadth rather than depth. And I think that also came out in like the test scores, for example, and that sort of thing. Like I was always in like the composite 99th percentile, but never in like the individual sections, like high percentiles. It was always like wow, you're good at multiple things rather than really good at this one thing. That always came out. And I think that was true at Stanford. Like, with the exception of history, I think I held my own in some of the higher, obviously I did a master's in it, so I must have. But for example, in CS, like I would say I was probably one of the best people in my freshman dorm at like the first series of classes. But the farther we got, the more I felt outstripped, and like there were so many smarter people than me and so many better people than me.
And so your aptitude maybe doesn't have a ton of depth within a particular subject other than, to your point, history, but your breadth is interesting. I wonder if part of it is a subconscious choice on your part not to explore depth.
I think so. I think not that I get bored easily, but I think it's always been really hard for me to choose something and say, this is the thing I like and this is the thing I'm good at. So even if you look at, the jobs I've had for my internships, I jumped between like business analyst, product manager, software engineer. In fact, when I came to Qualify, the big reason I chose to take the job at Qualify was I remember talking to Boomer, and he was like, yeah, come here, see what you want to do, figure it out, try a bunch of different things. And that's exactly what I did. So for the first, I want to say like 5 months I was at Qualify, I didn't really have like an official team or thing that I was doing. I was just doing all sorts of different random things. And I love that. I'm immensely grateful for Qualify having let me do that. But yeah, it's always been really hard for me to choose like, hey, this is the thing I really like. And I think I would get distracted. So like in those higher level economics classes or computer science classes, I was thinking like, hey, it'd be really cool if I took this poli-sci class,
Well, as an entrepreneur, I think you have to care about depth to some degree, but breadth, I think, is much more important.
That's what I keep telling myself. I hope that's true.
I guess you'll find out, but it's more than just you as an individual. There are a lot of things at play that you can't control or can't severely influence. I
think that's right to an extent, though, because when you're starting out, you have to do your everything, right? I think I was talking to someone the other day, and they were like, "Well, who's doing your marketing?" And I was like, "Me." It's me too. And they were like, "Well, who's doing your tech?" Me too. So you have
to head up, pick a topic, and the answer is
yeah, exactly. And so you have to do a little bit of everything. But we're so small and we're so new that you don't necessarily need an expert in it. And I think one thing I'm good at generally is knowing when I'm bad or bad at something or don't know that I'm out of my depth. And so I'm really looking forward to the day if we actually succeed, where I can start replacing myself one by one in these places. And hopefully that corresponds to where I stop being good at it.
I think there's an opportunity that it works out really, really well for you. And this may be an unfair question, Eddie, but if I was a small business guy and you and I were in an elevator for a couple of minutes, what's your elevator pitch? Have you been working on one?
Yeah. I mean, I've gone through a lot of iterations, so this will just be the iteration that we have now. Basically, the quick thing I would say is right now I could spend $20 to $30 to look up everything about your business. There's a good chance I wouldn't find anything. If I did find something, there's a good chance what I would find would be wrong. As a result of that, anything you want that requires the company on the other end to trust you is either going to be overpriced or it's not going to find you. Why don't you tell me about yourself? I'm going to share it with those companies, and I'm going to make that money that I could have paid on your behalf and pay it out to you. Does that sound like a good deal?
Sounds like a great deal.
Yeah.
So your business model works for businesses seeking to do business with other businesses.
Basically, yeah. It's a way. The idea is essentially that to market to small businesses or later in the pipeline to underwrite them is just prohibitively difficult and expensive in today's world. And the real losers in that situation are the small businesses themselves, who either overpay because of that, or who just don't get a solution built for them. Or if a solution that is built for them exists, they don't know about it and they never find it. And I kind of came to the realization they're the only ones who know about themselves. And they just need a way to be able to raise their hand and say, I'm a great business. Here's what you need to know about my business. Now give me what I want. And because there's tons of cost savings involved in doing that, we can basically collect the difference between the old way and the new way, and share that revenue with the business itself. Because, like I said, the business is the one who has that information, and the business should own the proceeds, basically, of that information.
Eddie, you seem like a guy that's going to write a book one day, maybe multiple books. Am I picking up something?
When I was a kid, that was my dream, to write a book. I didn't care what it was going to be on, but I really wanted to write a book as a kid.
But you're not there anymore.
I wouldn't say that I'm not there. That just seems far in the future if it's going to happen.
Is it going to be a work of fiction or nonfiction?
When I was a kid, I really wanted to do fiction. The older I've been, the more I wanted to write something nonfiction. Yeah.
Okay, fair enough. Not nonfiction, but not perfectly fact-based. Maybe some opinion thrown in there, or storytelling to go along with it.
Honestly, so I had a renaissance in wanting to write a book. I'd say like, oh wow, time has flown. I was about to say 2 years ago, but I think it's actually 4 years ago. So the summer before I did my master's in history, I spent the summer in France, brushing up on my French. So I lived in Bordeaux and I did like French classes at Alliance Française. But mainly I was just hanging out. I was really not doing anything. And I read a whole lot. And that summer I kind of had a renaissance of like, yeah, maybe I should write something. And that summer I read a lot of these books in this genre. They're like autobiography, but not really. They're like enhanced autobiography. So I read this book. I mainly picked it up because I just thought the title was really funny because of my name. It was called The End of Eddie by this kid named Edouard. But I'd also read this book called The Idiot by this woman, Elif Batuman, I want to say her name is. But they're basically like autobiographical, but a lot of the details are either, mixed up or slightly changed, and you don't really know what's real, what's not. And I always thought that was a fun genre. That could be a fun one to write.
I think you're going to write one before you turn 40.
We'll see.
I don't know. I think Hans should do well.
I hope so.
I think you've got a part of the marketplace that's untapped.
I think that's the whole thing is these businesses, people just aren't building for them. And my dream is that if we succeed in 2 years, it's as easy to build something for a small business as it is for anybody else. And you don't worry about distribution or how am I going to sell this? You worry about, is this product good?
Yeah. And then the rest of it with some sweat and some longer hours will take care of itself.
Yeah.
Cool, man. All right. So Eddie, you and I said about an hour. Can you tell me a little bit more about your family before we end? And then I've got one fun question that I ask most of my guests.
Sure. We can go slightly longer too, if you prefer, but okay. Yeah, I don't have a time limit. But what was I going to say? My family, anything specifically?
No, just when I say, tell me about your family, what would you say?
I would say my dad's Lebanese. My mom is British. They both live in DC now. They're very nice.
Are you an only kid?
I am actually. I'm an only child. Yeah, my parents actually divorced when I was very, very young.
But you still have relationships with both.
Yep. I did the very typical divorce thing of bouncing back and forth between the two.
Bouncing like 50-50 or more time?
Yeah. It was a pretty hilarious divorce agreement, I think. People actually usually can't believe or don't believe me when I tell them the agreement because I think it is a little absurd, but it worked out all right. But basically I would sleep at my dad's house Mondays and Tuesdays, and then at my mom's house Wednesdays and Thursdays. And then I would swap every other weekend at the two places.
Yeah, that's a lot of transitioning.
It was a whole lot of transitioning. It also, I think, contributed to some of my attitudes around homework because it was really hard to keep up with homework when you're moving so much. And Yeah. That's all
Yeah,
I'll say.
and I imagine your parents are different people, and they emphasize
Very different people. Very different people.
But it sounds like they're friendly these days.
Yeah.
Well, when you're the topic, they're friendly. How about that?
Yeah. They're not like, they don't hate each other or anything, but I don't think they'd like grab a coffee.
Fair enough. You mentioned a young lady that you're seeing. How long have you all been dating?
I think
You've been dating long
now
enough to share her name. How about that?
she goes by JJ.
How long have you and JJ been dating?
About 3 years
Oh, wow.
at this point, or maybe
That's a
2. And it's so hard with COVID, I'll be honest, to be able to sense how long. I think it's actually closer to 2. I always get confused with COVID timelines, I'll be honest. But yeah, I think 2 years actually is more accurate.
So the pandemic had just started when you guys started?
Yeah,
dating?
we met literally in January of 2020. So yeah,
So
2 years.
right before the declaration, at least in the US. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the day we actually like decided we were dating was the day that everything shut down, which is how I remember like our anniversary / all of that, is because it was March 11th. And March, I want to say 9th, I had a business trip for Capital One, because I was at Capital One at the time, where we drove to Richmond. We drove back March 11th. And that night, I met up with her for drinks, and I got an email saying, don't come to the office tomorrow. It's like a test for COVID. And I never went back to the Capital One office again, and we started dating. So kind of a momentous day, March 11th.
All right, so you met her in January, but you started dating in March.
Yeah, we were just like friends before that.
Okay, got it. All right, cool. JJ it is.
Yeah.
Is she really going to be mad if she hears her whole
Yeah.
name?
I think so.
Rob, are you noting the time here? That was around the hour mark. I'll have to go in and edit. Am I going to get in trouble or get you in trouble if I don't edit that out?
Probably not, but better safe than sorry.
All right, I've done plenty of editing in the last 2 years. I'm sure I can take care of that one. All right, here's the question I asked folks, and you've listened to 2 or 3 of these. Did you make it all the way through the ones you listened to?
I did not. I jumped around.
So this will be new. This will surprise you a little bit. This is meant to be a little more revealing about you than the typical questions and answers. So you're a talk show host. You can bring on your own guests. It's a one-time only deal. This is not going to be a series for you. This is just a 1 hour, 1 day, 1 night sort of thing. Your guests can be alive or not. They can be famous or not. They can be people you know or not. Your show can strive to be entertaining. It can be thought-provoking. It can be whatever you want it to be. You get to invite and interview a female guest, a male guest, and a musical guest. Who do you invite on your show?
And I can't like double up like.
If you want to be creative and go outside the question, that's fine. I get a pause almost every time I ask.
Yeah, no, I'm thinking. Musical guest is like musical artist I would prefer to talk to and interview, or musical guest I would enjoy just like jamming out to while in between. Okay. So I'm a big maybe a little, some people think it's embarrassing, but I don't care. I'm a huge Drake fan, so I would love to have Drake.
No, I don't know what that means. Why would that be embarrassing? Because he's too commercial?
Not necessarily that he's too commercial. I think he's definitely overstayed his welcome. Like, I'll admit his more recent music isn't great. And I think he's also just a little bit too generic for modern tastes, but I kind of grew up with him, so I like him. So I would have Drake. Yeah, he also seems like a fun guy to be around, honestly. So Drake would be my musical artist. That's the easiest one. If I get to pick 2, one that I'd like to interview, I really like The Weeknd as well. So if I get to pick 2, I'd cop out and then have
The Weeknd is very, very talented and a very bright guy is the impression I have.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
I obviously haven't interviewed him, so if you can set this up, that'd be great. But
sure, I'll work with it.
I put the 2.
You pick 2 living people, so there's a chance.
Yeah, there is a chance. So those are my 2 musical guests. Interview subjects. Sorry.
No, you're good. It's all good. I'm trying to stay quiet so you can think. Which one are you thinking about right now, male or female?
Oh, I keep going back and forth.
Back to the Brett thing. You don't want to stay in place too long.
Yeah. Female, this is pretty corny, I'll admit, but it's the best answer I can come up with. Is my grandmother on my dad's side died when I was relatively young. And I obviously knew her. Like I think she died when I was, not like 8 or 9, let's say. I don't remember the exact year, but I knew her, but I never like had an intelligent conversation with her, So I think it'd be really interesting to be able to have an intelligent, like thought out conversation with her where I'm like an adult. I think that'd be cool.
And your dad probably has a lot of positive and nice things to say about his mom.
Yeah, certainly. But it's different because I don't actually know her. You know what I mean? Like my memory is just a woman who made amazing French fries, but that's not really, that's not, who a person is. So I'd really love to be able to actually like get to know her and know her well beyond the French fries. Yeah.
So your grandmother grew up in Lebanon.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my grandmother's Lebanese.
French fries are a thing?
French fries are a huge thing in Lebanon, but one of the funniest things with Lebanese food, actually, I think, is how French fries find their way in it. It's like in Lebanon, if you get a wrap or a burger and you order fries as well, you might think that the fries come on the side. Nope, they put the fries in the wrap or the burger, which is always a funny thing for people who are new to Lebanon.
Yeah, that's got to affect the taste in a dramatic way, right?
I'm a big fan, so I do it. But yeah, it is dramatically different, and I was actually shocked when I first encountered that.
Cool. All right, that's a great answer. I love that answer.
Right. Cool. Male. Let me think. I would say this is going in a completely different direction, but the historian who I first read, who I really, really liked and kind of made me interested in history as like an academic discipline versus just, oh, these are some cool facts and they give a history for cool places, and more kind of like, hey, like this is a real discipline and something that's worth spending time with and thinking deeply about. Was Eric Hobsbawm. You know who that is? Yeah, he's a historian. And my history teacher had actually given me his book Age of Extremes, which was one of those first books that really like sparked my curiosity in history academically. So I think he's dead now, and meeting him would be pretty cool.
You're looking up whether he's alive or dead?
Yeah, I'm curious. I'm like 90%
his last name?
sure he's dead. Yeah, he is very dead. Okay. Eric Hobsbawm, Hobsbawm.
Okay. It's a unique name.
It is a unique name. I don't know what the origin is.
Yeah, I don't either. Weird. All right, so okay. All right, so that's quite an eclectic group there.
Yeah, I guess so.
You see your grandmother sitting next to the Weeknd?
I think she'd jam out, but really, I don't know, right? That'd be part of the fun of finding out. What type of music does she like? Don't know. So
I think she'd probably like the Weeknd's music.
I'd hope so. Yeah.
Very cool. So back to we'll end with the breadth comment. Hansa, what's your horizon for the range where you're like, hey, the soonest we will be successful is X number of months or years away, and the longest that I'm willing to make a good faith effort here. Have you thought that way, or is it much more?
Oh, 100%. I don't think you can make a decision where you're potentially like, well, my entrepreneurship in residence ends mid-July, and from that point on, I won't be taking a salary. So it's really hard to make a decision like that without having that in mind. I think it's important, in fact, to set an end date to keep yourself sane a little bit. And I've kind of given myself a year minimum from that date that I would keep working on it, unless something obvious happened where it's like, this is the stupidest idea known to man, you should do something else. Then I would obviously reconsider. I'm not that stubborn, but I'd give it at least a year and then reconsider, like, hey, how are things going? Is this working? Do I have any signs of traction? If the answer is yes, I would give it another year. If after that there's nothing, I have run out of resources and I will be looking for a job. So 1 to 2 years is sort of the horizon of I'm going to give this a shot. How long do I think it will take to actually work if we're successful? The answer is I've never done this before and I have no idea, but I'm hoping it's within that 1 to 2 year timeline.
Are you having fun?
I'm having a great time. I think that is not always true, though. It's interesting. At Qualify, they actually had these monthly entrepreneurship discussions where they would bring in an entrepreneur. And one of them had said, some days I feel like on top of the world. I feel like it's the greatest decision I've ever made. And some days I just feel like an idiot and it's horrible. And I resonate with that. I think the good days are far outpacing the bad days now, as I've really come to peace and gotten in a groove of what I'm doing. But especially after the first month, like we hit our first milestone in the first month where we like published a website, we went public, and we had like done so much. And at the end of that first month, I just sat down and I was like, what now? What do I do? And it took me a couple of days to really realize, like, well, I get to decide what we do. I have to trust myself that what we're doing is right. I just got to start making decisions and sticking to them and setting goals and being ambitious about getting them and just try my best from there. And so ever since I kind of came to that realization, it's been a lot better. But there are still days where I'm just like, wow, it'd be a lot easier to have a real job.
Was today a good day?
Today was a great day, actually.
That's cool. I'm glad talking to you at the end of a great day.
This week has been really good. Just made one of the interesting things with doing this is I hadn't like coded for a long time in any sort of professional capacity. And for this, I'm, our lead engineer as we went over. And it's been really interesting going back to my roots there, relearning a lot of things and just growing back into the engineer I might have been a few years ago. That's been a really interesting journey. And if nothing else, I have learned how to be a professional software engineer again. So I could always go back to that now.
Do you want to do that?
No, I don't think so. But it's an option.
If you had to, sure.
If I had to.
You need to eat, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, hey, Eddie, thanks so much for doing this. I really appreciate you making the effort yesterday.
Of course.
I apologize for my technical difficulties on my end. But yeah, great talking to you. I love learning a lot more about you. And I wish you nothing but the best in general. And certainly with Hans, I hope you go to the moon with that.
Thank you. I hope so too.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to wherever you listen to podcasts. We'd also really appreciate if you'd rate and review us. You can find us at scodupodcast.com.